So this year's right to know. Let's. I just getting messages as we talk. Um, I'm not sure how much we want to change it, other than the fact, obviously, we want to make sure we've got everything in there that everybody should be aware of. Like, obviously, it's a federal standard, it's a state standard. I know that Department of Health or Department of Labor is out there making sure that districts are doing the training with all their appropriate staff, which obviously means everybody, and how we are going to have access to safety data sheets. So at this point, Ray, do you want to take the lead on talking about safety data sheets and where they can find them and what the information is on it?
Oh yeah, everybody should have the MSDS Online app or the desktop icon available. And it is, it's an electronic online database where you can search any chemical that you have. Now, do you want me to talk about if they have, because not everybody has an e-binder too, but do you want me to talk that way anyway?
Well, what about, so how about going through something simple, like somebody wants to find out about a product that they have, and let's say they don't have the icon on their computer, and they can just go to SDS Online and do a search.
Yes. Do you want me to say that we've made that available, or just?
Yeah, because it should be available. I got to answer the phone. You keep talking.
All right. So yeah, MSDS Online should be available for all of our component districts. If you have a chemical that you need to find specific information on, it's a very simple search. It works as a search engine. You type the chemical name into the search box, and a list of chemicals will come up. You find the one that you're looking for, click on it, and the safety data sheet is right there. It's available. You can scan through, you can find ingredients, disposal methods, first aid measures, anything that you're looking for, you can find through the MSDS Online program search engine.
So it appears that my car warranty is up.
Again.
So,
you'll have that.
Again, for the 48th time. So we probably should mention just some real basic stuff, which is, the hazard communication standard is the standard that's covered by OSHA and, of course, in New York State. It's called New York State Right to Know, covered by Public Employee Safety and Health Administration, or PESH. Employees have rights for information. And most of the information that we look for, obviously, is information that's on the SDSs. Exposure rates, how to handle the material properly. Everybody has a right to ask that information.
So in 2012, the United States adopted the global harmonized system for classifying chemicals. What this did, it allowed us to have a universally accepted label requirements for all of our chemicals. And we went to standardized pictograms and two different indicator words, one being danger and one being warning.
Another thing the GHS system did was it actually standardized the format of the safety data sheet, which I think is really important. And instead of, chemical manufacturers putting the information in any order they want, there's a specific 16 section format in the safety data sheet, so that when you look at them, that, section 3 is ingredients, section 5 is proper handling procedures. And it just made things a little bit easier to find on the safety data sheet.
A full face shield and a respirator and gloves and a Tyvek suit in the process of using that product, you might want to reevaluate that product, for a decision. Part of that conversation was last year when we started using those, some districts were using those electrostatic cleaners. And what they had was that some people developed a rash. And part of the reason for that is those electrostatic cleaners, you should be wearing gloves because you do get overspray. I mean, and the spray is basically the pellet is basically a bleach solution. And so there's a few other things in there, but that's the main component. And so people were spraying with them without wearing gloves, and they were getting typical hand rashes. Or if they were walking through, they weren't applying it correctly as the manufacturer. Again, we're always talking about using a product the way the manufacturer tells you to use it. So there were some instances that people were spraying and they were walking through the cloud of the spray just because they weren't necessarily following the manufacturers, or the training wasn't done correctly, or whatever the reason was. And so you'd get some people who had some contact dermatitis as a result of that. So, that it's obviously important that even with all the stuff that we have regarding safety data sheets and everything, ultimately it's the end user that needs to make sure that they're using the product the way it's intended to use it.
So you want to talk about the hard copy binders?
Yeah, we probably should talk about that, because obviously it's nice to be able to have that electronic copy, but if it's the middle of the night, if you're a second shift employee, right, and you don't have necessarily quick access to a computer or the period of time, so let's talk a little bit about the paper copies, because I think it's important for people to know that.
So like we stated before, MSDS Online, it's a great online program, and it's a great online database. It stores millions, thousands of safety data sheets that are available to you at any point in time, as long as you have access to a computer. And there are times when, if it's second shift or third shift employees, run into a scenario where they need access to that safety data sheet and there isn't a computer available. And for that instance, we do keep hard copy binders available in the maintenance and custodial areas, even the science and art and kitchen areas. We try to keep these hard copy binders available for scenarios that require them. And anytime you run into a situation where you don't have access to a computer and you need to find that specific information on that specific chemical.
Maybe we should talk a little bit about exposure to cats. See, I see the cat in the corner there. Exposure, short-term, long-term, acute versus chronic.
Acute versus chronic exposure. Acute exposure is when you're exposed to something and you have symptoms immediately. Chronic exposure is when you're exposed to something, but you don't necessarily show symptoms for months or years afterwards. An example of chronic exposure would be asbestos.
The dog puked again.
Oh, excuse me.
The dog puked. Nice. And there is the live. That's what happens when you have human beings. And
that's perfect.
Could you hear her?
Yes, absolutely. Well, I think obviously that most people's exposures are going to be, acute, and probably, probably COVID in some ways is a good example of that. You have the short-term exposure of being sick for a short period of time, but maybe COVID's not a good example.
Well, it could be in the fact that you say that it's, long-term effects are not,
right.
We don't really know yet what
right.
the long-term effects on your lung capacity or your heart and all that would be.
And so in some ways, that's almost a classic when it comes to that.
It almost covers both.
Yeah. I mean, the same thing kind of happens with, with exposure to chemicals. That's why we want employees to, be limited to that type of exposure, because short-term exposure, you might have something, you might be ill for a period of time, and we don't know necessarily 10 or 15 or 20 years down the road. And so obviously that's why we want employees to be careful about the exposure and read labels and do the types of things that they should be doing when they're working around chemicals.
Or you could use the Lime Away from the kitchens, because a lot of them don't wear the goggles and the apron and the gloves like they're supposed to.
If you're using a product, even in the kitchen area, like Lime Away, that, you should be wearing gloves and a face shield, because that's the only way you can protect it. It's a corrosive, and it is something that can splash up. And, we certainly, I know we've had Department of Labor come through, and that's one of the primary areas that they talk about, and also having eye wash stations in those locations because of the potential for a splash. So it's not just custodial maintenance areas or art rooms and science rooms. Every location has there's a, I don't want to say a hidden danger, but there's always a danger there when you're around chemicals. There's always a potential exposure issue. Obviously, some of the things that we have to worry about are physical hazards. I want to make sure that we talk a little about when it comes to the SDSs, that people are, the safety data sheets, that people realize that there's information having to do with flammability. And Linda, just for a second, why don't you talk a little bit about fire drills and the importance of them and making sure that we've got clear access and that type of stuff. So we should probably talk a little bit about fire safety here. So Linda, you wanna take a little bit of that?
Sure. So fire safety in schools remains just as important today as it was 30 years ago. We're not seeing as many fires in school districts, but that's because of the safety precautions that we have in place. There is a certain number of fire drills that each school district has to do every year. It's important to be completing those drills in a timely fashion. And it's important for everyone to know where their nearest exit is, where their secondary means of egress is, and to keep those means of egress free from any obstacles that anyone would have to climb over to get out of them.
All right, I guess we're all finished. So there's only one thing left to do. 1, 2, 3.
Welcome back.